As part of our diversity and inclusion initiative in the district, we are looking to propose 2 new classes in this area. One is a social justice and modern world class, which will be taught actually out of our English department. So it's going to be taking the content of social justice topics, applying junior, senior level English standards, and kind of combining those together. So it's proposed as a half a credit, so it's going to be a 1 semester long class. And the class is going to start by having students examine their own relationship with justice and bias and identity. As the course progresses throughout the course of the year, students will examine several areas of social justice, such as poverty. They'll talk about race, sexism, gender identity, those kind of topics. Even environmental justice is one of the options that students will be discussing. So the point of that course is to expose, to help develop individual points of view. So they'll do that through class readings, discussions, and reflection.
Are there different options for, so the subject you're talking about now, the text, the book, what they actually learn, who's writing it, how it's, do you decide that? Are there, because there's probably a broad range in there.
Yeah, there's not, that's a good question. There's not like a specific textbook at all that we'll be asking the board to adopt for this class. Instead, it'll be like a collection of articles, maybe a novel that I might come to you later to ask to
Who
discuss.
chooses that? Is that your position to choose?
And the teacher really chooses it in consultation with administrators, yeah.
Is that something as a board we look at and approve or don't approve?
The board does approve things like whole class reads of novels. So we're still in discussion as to whether or not this would be a combination of some fiction and nonfiction. So it could be a story about one of these topics that they read. And if we do select a novel, which we're still kind of having some discussion about, that would be something that I would come back and ask you to approve, because it would be a whole class read that every student that signed up to take that class would participate with. If that makes sense.
Matt, I did have a
Yes.
question about that course description.
Yes.
That in the second paragraph on that, it almost seems like that's out of place, where it says night times in the daily news broadcast. Is because like it ends, so there's a sentence that ends right above it. Currently, these units are global poverty, domestic, and it leaves you hanging. But then when you go to the second column, you can see where it says domestic poverty, race, sexism. So that whole little blurb about night times in the daily news broadcast, I'm thinking that's like.
You know what? I know exactly what you're talking about, because there are 2 files for this. This must be the incorrect file where that is the placement of that is wrong.
Yeah.
You're right. Thank you. We'll get that corrected. It is. Yep,
Yeah, make
thank
sure
you.
it's not the one that goes to the printer.
Yes. Thank you. Sorry about that. The last class that I want to highlight for you is going to be taught out of our social studies class. It's another elective, and it's really, specific to what's happening in the world around us. And so that's going to be a race and film class. It is a half credit social studies elective. And so this class will use film to analyze and discuss the impact of race in society, really in American society. So the class is designed to really engage students in thinking about how discrimination, oppression, inequality has developed over time with people of color. So the class will study what has happened in history and raise awareness of the importance of embracing differences.
I guess my question too goes to that, like
Yes.
who decides what's happened in history? Because there can be conflicting points of view on how discrimination or how world history is viewed.
Yes.
I'm not saying certain views are right or wrong, just that we're looking at how it's being projected to our kids.
Sure.
It's far different than what I learned in 1976.
Right.
And I'm not saying that was right either, but
Mhm.
they're just wildly different. And who decides that? Again, you or the teacher? Because what I'm finding in universities across the country are wildly different, again, than, and I'm not saying that it's right or wrong, but there's different ways to project what's gone on in our country, what goes on in the world, and what text or books that we're reading
Mhm.
that can project a thought process that may or may not be right. And
You're right.
I
And-
feel like we've got to decide a little bit more. Some of the things that they're learning out there just aren't necessarily correct, and
One of the things
I don't know if we
learned-
have any say-so in that, either as a board or as a school, or does the state of Ohio or the federal government, who's deciding what the proper text is?
Jordan, did you have?
I
before I
was just
answer?
gonna say something that wasn't online with textbooks. I think typically districts approve locally textbooks, things like that, so it would be something that would come across the table. I was just gonna say, the Ohio School Board Association a couple years ago had their Capitol Conference, and there was a guest speaker there that I thought was interesting. It was not necessarily race in film, but it was women in film. And it said when the forensic files came out, the whole CSI thing, and they had women roles playing them in the film industry, how shortly thereafter, there was just like this significant increase in women and girls going into forensics and science and forensics. I think it's just maybe some of the things are just connecting the dots to like that kind of thing, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And, you know, to kind of answer your point, you know, too, Dan, I mean, we select those items and kind of in conversation with the departments and teachers developing these classes, kind of our objective is, you know, it's not our job we're not trying to sway anyone to any particular point of view.
Absolutely.
We're not trying to shame anybody into thinking if you have a perspective that you're wrong and to shame them in any way or to indoctrinate them at all. It is really out of a place of building critical thinking skills for students to be able to research and come to an understanding on a topic that might be a little bit uncomfortable, might be a little bit controversial. And so that's the world that we're living in. And so we think that it would be a great experience for our juniors and seniors to practice this skill as they prepare to kind of go out into the world, you know, and kind of a
That's my
safer,
biggest
smaller
concern
bubble.
is there a balance? Because we're not seeing it in education right now. And if your point of view is not of what they're projecting, you're squashed. And you know, my kids are in universities now, and some of that way it's being projected is not always of their thinking, or maybe our thinking as a family, and then that gets squashed. And I think there has to be a balance of how, and you're not wrong thinking this way, and how you think this way, and not wrong, but it seems like the balance is shifting wildly,
Mm,
especially in universities across the country.
yeah. Well, it would be our goal to make sure that that's a good balance and that we're not providing a single point of view, because that kind of defeats the purpose of the class.
I like too that it's in the write-up that it says the United States films, points
Right.
of view. And
Right.
so I think that's a very healthy place to start. So Dan, I agree with you.